So just to round out my introduction, I'm a UX designer with EPAM. I've been in Philly about 6 or 7 years, started out at Electronic Inc., Bressler Group, Tamin, and I'm now with EPAM as a senior UX designer. Also, as a bit of a shameless plug, I'm working on a book on UX research methods, things like contextual inquiry, heuristic reviews, and a lot of that. It's actually targeted release for early November, but if you're interested in raw, unedited books, it's actually available for early release as we write the chapters, we publish them. So it's highly embarrassing for me, but if you're interested, feel free to check that out. But going on with today's plan and today's discussion, we're going to be talking about heuristics and how we can think of them sort of beyond the traditional academic review. So I want to start by just defining what heuristics are, sort of make sure we're all using the same vocabulary, all on the same page with that. Talk about some of the existing challenges with heuristics as they exist. Introduce a new paradigm that we've come up with at EPAM. We pride ourselves in creating a lot of templates, whether it's wireframes, research protocol, or anything like that, and heuristic evaluations have gotten that treatment as well. And then talk about some of the opportunities and, of course, have some time for Q&A as we have had all day. So what are heuristics? Heuristics refer to experience-based techniques for solving, learning, and discovery that give a solution which is not guaranteed to be optimal. This phrase, not guaranteed to be optimal, is what I find really exciting and have always really found interesting about heuristics. They're not best practices, they're not standards, they're not rules. There's no one right or wrong way when thinking about a heuristic. Instead, they're mile markers on the road to creating a solid, valuable product. And heuristics are often used in heuristic evaluations. And what those are methods that help identify usability problems in the design by measuring the interface against recognized heuristics. So again, we're taking this thing that is not guaranteed to be optimal, and we're using it to measure against an existing design, an existing product, or something else. But it's that idea of measurement that's really important because we're measuring, we're not trying to grade it as pass or fail. There's a gray scale in between. Now, there are a lot of really common places to find heuristics. Some of the most common up on the screen. Nielsen's are probably the ones that we're all most familiar with. But I also like providing Abby Covert's name at the bottom. She came up with a list of information architecture heuristics back in 2012. I really liked adding her to the list because other than her being a good friend of mine, this list is geared towards information architecture. So the language is a little bit more approachable, the language is a little bit more modern, and we can really think of them being much more accessible in a lot of the digital web world that we live in today. And when we think about where these heuristics are used, they're very often done in the Microsoft realm. So Word, Excel, PowerPoint, there's really no wrong way to create a heuristic evaluation, although Clippy sort of reigns supreme here, and it's pretty frustrating if you've ever had to create one of these, because they can be pretty long, lengthy documents. And that's just one of the challenges with heuristic evaluations as they exist today. The shortest evaluation I've ever created is probably 40 or 50 pages, and I've created them as upwards of 60, 80, and 100 pages, if not more. And one of the main reasons for that length is because heuristic evaluations are a very academic process. When I first learned about heuristics, when I first learned about recognition over recall, which is the idea of don't make me think about my password and think about the requirements, much like Jim was saying this morning, when I have to think about that, there's the idea of frequency and persistence if you learn about heuristics in a college and a university environment. To this day, I cannot tell you the difference between frequency and persistence without thinking long and hard over which is which. And I'm pretty sure I still get the distinction wrong about half the time. I label frequency as persistence or the other way around. So there's this horrible ivory tower feeling with heuristic evaluations that we really need to step away from. And another big challenge is heuristics as they are today are all pretty dated. With the exception of Abby's heuristics that came out about 4 years ago, all the other heuristics are well over 20 years old, 20, 25 years old, right around that range. So we're dealing with language, we're dealing with examples, we're dealing with definitions of things that are older than the students in university that are learning them today. And that's both sobering, but also a little disconcerting. The language that they're written for, they still apply to the work we do, but it's also a challenge because the way they were written was for a different set of applications. It was written for desktop applications because the web was still really immature, and it had no consideration for mobile whatsoever. And that's the last main issue with heuristics as they exist today, is they lack a lot of context. Typically, a heuristic eval is sort of a shotgun blast of, here is everything wrong with your system. We're not going to take into consideration specialization of if it's a doctor using it or a patient. We're not going to take into consideration context of use. We're just going to say, based off of this notion, this is how the system passes or fails these different measurements. But we're not going to look at who's actually using the system. So with that sort of as a quick background of what heuristics are and how we got there, I'd like to talk about a new approach we came up with at EPAM. As I mentioned before, we come up with a lot of different templates. So we have wireframe templates for InDesign, OmniGraph, and most recently Sketch. We have different Word documents for kickstarting research protocols and anything else, customer journey maps, persona documents, you name it. The idea really being we like to kickstart those initiatives so that anyone at any level in our organization can pick up those documents and be just as informed as the most senior person in the room on how they can create it and how they can look like the smartest person in front of our clients. We do this as a team effort, so I just need to thank Scott, Dave, and Dan. The three of them, along with myself, spent a few months crafting the heuristic protocol that we're going to be sharing today. So I just wanted to sort of acknowledge that these all are team efforts. And the way we treat these efforts is like any other user experience process. So we start by defining our goals, our users, our tasks, and everything else. And what I want to do briefly is just go through each of these steps now and talk about how this UX process applied to our creation of a new heuristic model. So we started by wanting to have a goal. We had two main goals that we identified. One, we wanted to tell a story. Rather than it just be a laundry list of here's everything we found wrong with the system, here's all the heuristics it violated, we wanted to make sure we had a beginning, a middle, and an end. We wanted to make sure that people saw the site and that they knew that we looked at it from a more strategic level. And we also wanted the evaluations to be able to fit as part of other research. Very often, heuristic evaluations are done either as part of a pre-sales or very early on in a project to get everyone on the same page. And then that lovely 60, 80, 100-page document I mentioned, it becomes a glorified doorstop. But we wanted to find ways where this could really become more of a tool to inform qualitative research, quantitative research throughout an entire project life cycle. So we understood what our goals were with creating this new paradigm. And then we wanted to make sure we understood who our users were. And there were three main user groups we identified. Of course, there are the business stakeholders, our clients, the people paying us to do the work. And there are also the product users, the people who are actually using the system. I mentioned how context is often missing in these type of evaluations. It's very easy to gain that context if we think about who's using the system. Ideally, we have data-driven personas if it's a pre-existing system or pre-existing company, but maybe all we have are market segments to define that from. And lastly, us, the product team. Everyone in this room, whether you're a designer, a developer, a BA, or anything else, anyone involved on the product team level, we're the users of this too because we want to use it throughout the project and not just as a doorstop. So we know what our goals are. We know who our users of this document are. Let's talk about the tasks. We identified 4 key tasks when talking about what an evaluation is so that it's no longer just that shotgun blast of what's wrong with the system. The first was, what do the users want to do? Why are they coming to your system? Is it because you're an e-commerce site and they're looking to buy a new sweater? Is it because you're an EMR, EHR, and medical data and sensitive data needs to be entered? What's the context of that task? Not just are you at home, on the go, on the couch, or anything like that, but is this a high stress or a low stress environment? What type of emotions might be involved there? And what platforms are you doing this on? Is it web or desktop? Is it mobile or tablet? Is it native or third party? And what implications are there? And most importantly, I think, to me, is what's changed? What's changed or what's different between yourself and your competitors? What's changed or what's different between your current version that you're looking to redesign and the previous versions? And when we can look at it through that idea of what's changed, we really get a much better understanding of how we can view the heuristics. It now gives us a lens to understand, okay, it failed before and it still fails now, and it failed for these reasons, or it failed before and we can turn that failure into a success, and how. And we wanted to make sure we also looked beyond user experience. So very often evaluations fall on my desk as a user experience designer, and I'm told to create this. I then talk with BAs and product managers and visual designers and content strategists, and I get their feedback on the document, but ultimately the document's mine to create and own. And maybe this is me just being selfish or lazy. I didn't want to own this document. I wanted to make sure that everyone had equal ownership in it. So this was the fourth goal that we identified. And then lastly, again, we wanted to show and not tell. We wanted to define a journey, define a story, and ultimately have collaboration across the entire team throughout the entire project. Now, one way we found that was very important to do this was to step away from heuristics as they currently exist. So we came up with 3 lenses for evaluation. Rather than talk about recognition over recall or delight or minimalist design or any of these complex terms, we simplified heuristics into asking 3 questions about perception, comprehension, and operation. With perception, we ask, can I see the information, task, or content? And this is really when we bring the visual designers into the room. We ask them, is the typography, the color, the layout, what does this violate, what does this do well, and how can we make it better? With comprehension, we ask, do I understand the information presented to me? This is where content strategists really come into play, and this is where they really shine because we're talking about tone and voice and language. And then with operation, can I complete the task or action I set out to do? This is the traditional UX role of, does it fit the workflow? Does it fit the mental model? Does it fit those understandings? So perception, comprehension, and operation, we've now brought visual design, content strategy, and UX all to the table at an equal level. So that at a high level is sort of how we came to coming up with this new evaluation process, this new paradigm. What I'd like to do now is take a few minutes and walk you through a sample presentation we've come up with now. This is a real presentation we gave to a client. The client name and the images have been swapped out, but this is a real presentation we shared, so this actually is client work. I don't want you to think this is entire vaporware. But what I'm going to do is the presentation will be up on the slides. I'm actually going to editorialize sort of how we came to create the presentation as it is. So you'll see the presentation the client saw, and I'll help give some commentary on why it surfaced the way it was. So we start, title slide, no need to reinvent the wheel. Every good presentation starts with that. But then immediately jump into what did we do? Over 5 days, content strategy, UX, and design leads assess key tasks presented on the Acme University's dining website. Now I should say when we spent 5 days, it wasn't 5 days creating this document. It was Monday, we were given the prompt, and it was actually Monday afternoon, we were given the prompt. We identified 5 key tasks based off of the number of screens we would be able to see, as well as ease. We wanted to avoid any paywalls. We wanted to avoid creating accounts and things like that because we only had 5 days. Tuesday, myself, a content strategist, and a visual designer, we locked ourselves in a room for about 6 hours, and we created a traditional 80-page PowerPoint deck. It was awful. It was. Wednesday and Thursday, we took this new model that was in its early stages, and we actually adapted that 80-page document into this new model. And a quick spoiler, this whole thing, if I were to go through it all, which we won't today, is only about 15 or 20 slides. It only takes about 15 or 20 minutes. I'll be going through it a little bit faster, so don't worry about the time, Kevin. And then Friday, we presented to the client. So this was a 5-day task. But really, 3 days were spent doing it because Monday was lost and Friday we presented to the client. So we have our title slide, we tell you what we did, and then immediately we tell you what we found. We start by telling you these 6 things can make your site better. And we identified these 6 things by doing these 5 tasks. So now in a matter of 4 slides, we've told you we're a room full of experts who sat together, we actually looked at your site, and we identified these areas of improvement. So we're not just pulling things out of thin air. And if you zone out, if you have to take another call, if you're an executive who is only able to drop in, they got our most meaningful message right there. But we wanted to tell that story. We wanted to really communicate what that journey is. So we also provide more information about each of those tasks. The first task, find and compare a meal plan. We want to list out what the steps were. So this was a 7-step task. Rather than actually show each of those 7 steps, we really start jumping in. This is really as detailed as we get for showing that. And the main reason we show these 7 steps is because there are a lot of ways to review and compare meal plans. We wanted to show that these were the 7 steps we took so that when we're giving our analysis, when we're giving our recommendations, there's an understanding that we might not have gone down certain rabbit holes. We only went down this path for this exercise. But again, rather than show all 7 steps and sort of evaluate each individual page, which we did do on Tuesday, we ask a very simple question. Can users find and compare a meal plan? Yes or no? And this was great. The first task was a success. But that doesn't mean there still weren't opportunities for us to improve. Remember, this is a 7-page steps. There are a lot of areas to improve, whether it's iconography, the text, and what have you. So we still want to provide some images. So we provide 2 images from each task, just providing some context for that. The overwhelming amount of imagery, the confusing icons, or anything else like that. But that's as far as we go in task 1. We immediately jump into the second task. We only spend 4 slides on it. It only takes about 2 or 3 minutes to go over with the client. The second task, find a retail dining location. Again, we can list the steps, and we ask a question. Can users find a retail location that accepts dining dollars? Yes or no? This task, unfortunately, was a failure. We can still list the opportunities, and we can show the images. It's probably pretty clear to anyone here why this task was a failure: a giant, horrible PDF map and logos that are larger than a slice of pizza we had for lunch. So it was understandable why it failed, but we went over the 5 steps, we showed 2 images, and we continued to the next task. And we repeated this recipe for each and individual task. We had another success. The meal options are findable. We show some images, putting together meal plans. It's not easy to put together a meal plan in any way, shape, or form. And the same, again, PDF maps, we sort of see some areas that we would all probably accept as bad design. And then asking about getting healthy breakfast tips, again, list the steps, ask that question, another failure, show some images, and close out the presentation. So that is really a 15-minute presentation we give to clients, and we only had about 45 minutes to an hour with the client when we did this. What we were able to do then was start a lot of conversations with them. They were able to ask us, so you said there was, repetitive imagery. What did you mean by that? The appendix actually was that 80-page slide deck we created on Tuesday, just in a slightly cleaner format. So when they ask that question, we can navigate to that specific slide and say, yeah, there's 8 images, each one representing a different meal plan. It's the same image 8 times. Either come up with unique imagery or drop it all together. It's not serving the purpose you want. And that's really what a lot of the opportunities were here. A lot of the conversation we had with the client allowed us to inform gaps, either in our understanding of what they were trying to do or their understanding of what the system was. It helped define opportunities where we could come in and say, we can help you with that too. We pride ourselves in having a very large offshore development contingent. We do a full soup to nuts implementation. So when our client comes back and says, oh my gosh, we don't understand what our CMS is or the data migration or anything else, and our very simple 5-day exercise exposed those gaps, we're now able to come in with new business opportunities with them and new areas to support their work beyond what they might have initially asked us. We also found that this new model helped improve our collaboration. So within the team, having design, having UX, having content strategy, create this document together, any one of us could have shared the presentation and would have been equally expert on the content. It's no longer relying on one domain or one specialization or one skill set or one person to really carry this document and carry this presentation. And then when we brought it to the client themselves, they were invited to that conversation and to collaborate with us because we were telling a story that they were able to come along with. It wasn't, again, that laundry list of here's everything wrong with your site, but saying we went through the key tasks and you know these tasks as well, and these are the challenges we find with them. When we think about how we can then bring this beyond just the initial tool, just the initial evaluation, there's opportunity to find KPIs and OKRs. So if we know that a certain step is 7 pages and there's a lot of fall off after page 6, or there are a lot of issues on that, how can we tie some analytics into the system so that we can then quantifiably measure improvement with a redesign? And how can we then turn some of those no's, so we had 3 no's and 2 yeses in this evaluation, how can we turn some of those no's to yeses when we're paper prototyping, when we're wireframing, when we're product testing further down 2, 4, 6 months into this product life cycle? Internally, some of our next steps within EPAM, we're always looking to expand the templates, create more variations on the slides. These are never meant to be taken as rote scripture, but are meant to be starting points and have been used a few times and constantly evaluated. We're also really interested in coming up with our own set of EPAM heuristics. We do a lot of work in e-commerce, in financial and healthcare, and countless other verticals. And we're really interested in how coming up with heuristics specific to those verticals can, again, help streamline the conversation, can help anyone of any skill level and any experience level come in and create one of these documents with very little onboarding time. And then lastly, we're looking to expand our usage. Currently, we have these delivered out across our North America offices, ultimately share these worldwide with our teams so that, again, anyone can really take these documents and make the most use out of them. I'd like to thank everyone, and I know we have some time for questions, but also quite selfishly, the feedback link up there, I'm always looking to improve the content, how I give presentations, anything else. So if anyone takes 3 minutes, I would definitely appreciate that. Thank you.
Questions for Dave?
I'm very impressed with the approach, and I really like it. Can you tell me a little bit about the 3 lenses again, and some of the key takeaways of your own experience and feedback you receive from clients?
Yeah, so I'm just trying to jump up to it. So these guys? Yep. Yeah. So just to repeat the question, it's my impression of the 3 lenses and how clients respond to it?
Yeah.
Yep. So my personal experience, I actually have to credit Dave Fiorito from the team. He was the person in the middle for introducing me to this notion of perception, comprehension, operation. And at first it seemed almost overcomplicating the idea until we sat down and did an affinity diagram of the Nielsen, the WineCheck, the Abbey heuristics. We started with about 60 or 7 heuristics, and we grouped them as to which ones are perception related, do I see it? Which ones are comprehension, do I understand it? And which ones are operation tied. And doing that exercise, we really realized that of these 60 or 70 heuristics, they all fell into one of those 3 buckets quite nicely. So I very immediately saw the simplification there. From a client's perspective, it really, it removes a lens of abstraction. Almost by adding abstraction, it removes confusion. By no longer worrying about the 10, 15, 20 word definitions for each of the heuristics, we're simply able to say, this isn't visible, it's confusing. We often try to use fancy words and the 50-cent vocabulary words with clients, but at the end of the day, they just want to know what works and what doesn't. And simplifying it in this way of see, understand, do really helps with that.
Thank you.
God, speaker panel today.
So I remember from my agency days that sometimes this was a hard deliverable to sell.
Yep.
Because clients would start with, well, I already know it's wrong, that's why I brought you in, right? But internally it was valuable to us because it informs the design. So just wondering, how do you guys stress the importance of doing this to a client or perspective?
Of doing a heuristic evaluation? Yep. To some degree, heuristic evaluations sort of happen because it's how our process works. If you're working with us as EPAM, if you're working with our UX, one of the main focuses of this template was to reduce the time it takes so that clients don't come back and say, we don't want it, we're not paying for it. We tell them it's the first step in any process we do. It only takes this much time. And it really, one of the main goals of being able to bring this down to a week exercise, less than a week exercise, is to mitigate some of that risk. All the speakers, the hosts.
Alright, I'm going to put you on the spot because I was actually around as we were putting those heuristic evaluations together 25 years ago. And this sounds very nice and certainly seems appropriate for something that the team can imagine themselves in the place of a user.
Mhm.
How do you apply this process to something that is outside your realm of expertise? Call it, middle office trade reconciliation or heart surgery, applications for for which you need specialized training to understand?
Yep. So in the case of middle office trade, we're very lucky that whether it's financial, healthcare, e-commerce, we have someone who is some degree expert on that. So sort of that's the easy one, is we can pull someone in for those conversations. In the case of something much more esoteric like open heart surgery, or maybe there's an ER doctor type ambulance application, something like that, this probably wouldn't fit as well. We haven't had it quite put to the test like that yet, and I would definitely be curious to see how it could be evolved. But that's one of those areas where we're always looking to evolve the templates and whatnot. I wouldn't be surprised if something like this doesn't apply as well. I'm also curious how, I've also never seen traditional heuristic evaluations necessarily approach that well either. So I think there's probably a lot of learning there.
Anything else? No. Thank you, David.
Thank you.